Faith itself is not the problem, but religious systems, like any human structure, can create unhealthy dependencies. This video examines how faith can slowly shift into psychological reliance, not to attack belief, but to understand it more clearly. Addiction to approval. Approval addiction forms when religious environments quietly link worth to affirmation from others. It begins subtly. Praise is given for obedience, visible commitment, correct language, and loyalty. Over time, affirmation becomes the signal that faith is working. Silence or correction starts to feel like spiritual failure rather than normal human feedback. The system teaches, often unintentionally, that acceptance flows downward from respected figures and upward through conformity. This dependency satisfies a deep emotional need for safety and validation. Human beings are wired to seek belonging and reassurance, especially in communities that claim moral authority. When religious approval is framed as evidence of spiritual health, it becomes emotionally powerful. Approval soothes anxiety, quiets self-doubt, and provides a sense of being aligned with something greater. Approval disguises itself as humility and submission. Seeking affirmation is framed as accountability, teachability, or honoring authority. The language sounds virtuous, but the internal motive shifts. Actions are chosen not because they are true or meaningful, but because they will be affirmed. Internal conviction slowly gives way to external measurement. This feels righteous because approval is associated with goodness. Yet living faith becomes replaced by performance calibrated to please. Instead of growing discernment, the person learns to read reactions. Faith becomes fragile, dependent on applause or acceptance, rather than rooted in internal trust and honest conviction. Addiction to certainty. Certainty addiction develops when religious systems present absolute answers as the highest form of faith. Complexity is treated as weakness, doubt as danger, and unanswered questions as threats. Over time, the system rewards confidence more than wisdom and clarity more than honesty. Belief becomes rigid because flexibility is seen as spiritual instability. This dependency satisfies the psychological need for control. Certainty reduces anxiety in an unpredictable world. Clear answers provide relief from ambiguity, grief, injustice, and unanswered suffering. When religious certainty promises protection from uncertainty, it becomes emotionally comforting and deeply reinforcing. Certainty disguises itself as faithfulness. Strong declarations are praised as bold belief. Repetition of approved conclusions replaces thoughtful engagement. The system frames questioning as rebellion and curiosity as erosion. Confidence becomes mistaken for trust, even when it is rooted in fear of not knowing. This feels righteous because certainty sounds like devotion. Yet living faith requires trust amid uncertainty, not the elimination of it. When certainty becomes addictive, faith stops being relational and becomes ideological. The need to be correct replaces openness to growth. Instead of deepening understanding, the person defends conclusions at all costs, mistaking inflexibility for strength and control for faith. Addiction to rituals. Ritual addiction forms when external practices become the primary means of spiritual reassurance. Rituals begin as meaningful symbols, grounding belief in action. Over time, the system teaches that correct repetition equals spiritual alignment. Missing a ritual triggers guilt or fear, even when intention remains sincere. This dependency satisfies the need for predictability and structure. Rituals offer stability, especially during emotional distress. They create a sense of order, continuity, and belonging. When life feels chaotic, ritual provides a feeling of control and spiritual cleanliness. Rituals disguise themselves as devotion. Faithfulness becomes measured by attendance, posture, timing, or form. The external action slowly replaces internal engagement. The ritual becomes the goal rather than the expression of belief. Meaning gives way to obligation. This feels righteous because rituals look disciplined and reverent. Yet living faith is dynamic, not mechanical. When ritual becomes addictive, the practice continues even when meaning fades. The person relies on performance rather than awareness. Faith becomes something done correctly rather than something lived honestly, reducing spirituality to habit instead of transformation. Addiction to fear. Fear of punishment. Addiction develops when religious systems emphasize consequences more than growth. Obedience is framed as avoidance of harm rather than pursuit of good. Fear becomes the primary motivator for behavior. Over time, fear replaces discernment as the guiding force. This dependency satisfies the emotional need for safety. Fear narrows focus and simplifies choices. When punishment is emphasized, compliance feels protective. The system creates a constant low-level anxiety that keeps individuals dependent on authority for reassurance. Fear disguises itself as reverence. Anxiety is labeled seriousness. Hypervigilance is framed as moral alertness. The system teaches that constant fear proves commitment, while peace signals complacency. This feels righteous because fear is associated with respect and caution. Yet living faith grows through trust, not sustained anxiety. When fear dominates, faith becomes reactive rather than reflective. Behavior is shaped by avoidance rather than conviction. The person remains obedient but emotionally constricted, unable to mature because fear suppresses curiosity, compassion, and honest self-examination. Addiction to status. Spiritual status addiction forms when religious environments rank people by perceived maturity, gifting, or closeness to truth. Titles, visibility, and recognition become markers of spiritual worth. Advancement becomes proof of divine favor. This dependency satisfies the need for significance. Status offers identity, meaning, and purpose. It reassures individuals that their sacrifices matter and that they are progressing. The system subtly teaches that being seen equals being faithful. Status disguises itself as service. Leadership and visibility are framed as responsibility, but they also carry admiration. Over time, service becomes inseparable from recognition. The desire to help is entangled with the need to be elevated. This feels righteous because leadership appears noble. Yet living faith does not require hierarchy. When status becomes addictive, humility erodes. Decisions become strategic rather than sincere. Faith turns into a ladder rather than a path, shifting focus from inner growth to external position. Addiction to leaders. Leader addiction develops when authority figures are positioned as primary interpreters of truth and experience. Trust shifts from personal discernment to reliance on approved voices. Over time, disagreement feels like betrayal rather than dialogue. This dependency satisfies the need for guidance and certainty. Leaders offer clarity, protection, and direction. In complex spiritual landscapes, delegated trust feels safer than independent thought. Leaders disguise themselves as shepherds. Dependence is framed as submission. Loyalty is praised as unity. The system discourages questioning by equating it with rebellion or pride. This feels righteous because respect for leadership is valued. Yet living faith requires personal responsibility. When leaders become indispensable, growth stalls. Authority replaces conscience. Faith becomes mediated rather than lived, leaving individuals spiritually passive and vulnerable. Addiction to rules. Rule addiction forms when moral frameworks become rigid systems rather than guiding principles. Compliance becomes the measure of faithfulness. Over time, nuance disappears and rules become ends in themselves. This dependency satisfies the need for clarity. Rules simplify complex moral landscapes. They reduce uncertainty and provide measurable success. Rules disguise themselves as holiness. Obedience is emphasized over understanding. The system rewards conformity rather than wisdom. This feels righteous because discipline appears virtuous. Yet living faith requires discernment. When rules dominate, compassion diminishes. Faith becomes legalistic, reducing morality to checklists instead of thoughtful engagement with real human complexity. Addiction to being right. Being right addiction develops when correct belief becomes the central spiritual achievement. Truth is treated as possession rather than pursuit. Dialogue becomes debate, and disagreement becomes threat. This dependency satisfies the need for superiority and security. Being right provides identity and certainty. It shields against doubt and vulnerability. Being right disguises itself as conviction. Confidence is praised while humility is sidelined. The system rewards certainty over curiosity. This feels righteous because truth matters. Yet living faith values wisdom over dominance. When being right becomes addictive, learning stops. Faith hardens into ideology, prioritizing defense over growth. Addiction to belonging. Belonging addiction forms when identity becomes inseparable from group membership. Community becomes the source of meaning, safety, and validation. Leaving or questioning feels like personal collapse. This dependency satisfies the need for connection. Belonging reduces loneliness and provides shared purpose. The system amplifies this by framing separation as danger. Belonging disguises itself as unity. Loyalty is praised while individuality is suppressed. The group becomes sacred. This feels righteous because community is valued. Yet living faith allows movement and growth. When belonging becomes addictive, authenticity fades. Faith becomes conditional on acceptance rather than rooted in truth. Addiction to performance. Performance addiction develops when spiritual life is measured by output. Activity becomes proof of faith. Rest feels irresponsible. Stillness feels unproductive. This dependency satisfies the need for worth. Doing replaces being. Achievement substitutes for trust. Performance disguises itself as devotion. Busyness is praised as commitment. Exhaustion is reframed as sacrifice. This feels righteous because effort appears faithful. Yet living faith is not sustained by constant output. When performance dominates, faith becomes transactional. Spiritual life turns into labor, leaving little space for reflection, rest, or genuine transformation. Addiction to control. This dependency forms when religious systems promise order in exchange for surrendering ambiguity. Life's uncertainty, suffering, randomness, unanswered questions feels intolerable. So belief is reshaped into a mechanism for control. Correct doctrine, moral formulas, and cause and effect thinking are used to manage outcomes rather than cultivate trust. This addiction satisfies the emotional need to feel safe in an unpredictable world. Control reduces anxiety by creating the illusion that obedience guarantees results. When things go well, the system feels validated. When they do not, individuals blame themselves for insufficient faith or incorrect behavior. Control disguises itself as responsibility and wisdom. Planning becomes spiritualized. Certainty is framed as maturity. The system subtly teaches that faith's purpose is to manage life rather than to live honestly within it. This feels righteous because control looks disciplined and intentional, yet living faith requires surrender, not mastery. When control becomes addictive, faith turns transactional. Trust is replaced by technique, and belief becomes a tool for preventing chaos rather than engaging reality with openness and humility. Addiction to suffering. This dependency forms when pain is elevated as proof of spiritual depth. Hardship is interpreted as evidence of devotion, and ease is treated with suspicion. Over time, suffering becomes not just meaningful, but necessary. This addiction satisfies the need for validation. Pain becomes currency. It explains disappointment, gives meaning to sacrifice, and creates moral distinction. Endurance is rewarded with recognition, both internal and communal. Suffering disguises itself as faithfulness. Struggle is praised as strength. Rest is framed as weakness. The system teaches that joy must be justified and that peace may indicate compromise. This feels righteous because endurance is admirable. Yet living faith does not require constant pain to be authentic. When suffering becomes addictive, healing feels threatening. Growth is resisted because struggle has become identity. Faith shifts from trust to endurance, locking individuals into cycles of hardship that are sustained not by belief, but by obligation. Faith was never meant to function as a system of dependence. When belief becomes driven by fear, control, approval, performance, or certainty, it slowly shifts from trust into obligation. These patterns are not signs of weak faith, but of human systems trying to manage what was meant to be lived freely. Recognizing these dependencies is not a rejection of faith. It is often the first step toward a healthier, more honest one. If this exploration helped bring clarity or language to experiences that felt confusing or heavy, consider subscribing to this channel where we break down complex topics in an easy-to-understand way and explore thoughtful, great conversations about belief, doubt, and spiritual freedom.